incredible panel.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for making the time. My name is Jenny Nepern, and I'm one of the public sector career counselors at Georgetown Law. Specifically, I focus on fellowship counseling, and I attended this program as a student, and I'm thrilled to be here today and to get to continue learning more. I always learn something new at this program. So I'm going to start with asking Antonio to please introduce yourself and to share the fellowship program that you've done, where you went to law school, and to just elaborate a little bit on the fellowship and where you were placed.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Jenny. Hi, everyone. My name is Antonio Del Grande. I graduated from NYU Law in 2022, and I am the Fried Frank Civil Rights Fellow. So for those of you who don't know what that entails, it is essentially a 4-year fellowship program that is split between working here at the firm, Fried Frank, and you come in as an associate. You're doing sort of the classic big law work. And then at the end of this year, I'll have finished my 2 years with the firm, and I will be transitioning. I'll be moving to Texas to work with MALDEF, the Mexican American Legal Defense and Educational Fund. The interest in, and I'll work there for 2 years as a staff attorney, and be able to contribute to their civil rights work. The interesting thing about this particular fellowship is that it alternates host organizations. So while I'll be going to MALDEF in the fall, in alternating years, the firm sends its fellows to the NAACP LDF, and so those alternate back and forth. So that's the basics. I can certainly talk more about it. And of course, we have here Laura Sinrod, who's sort of in charge of the fellowship programs that we have here, and she'll have a lot of great information as well.
Thank you so much, Antonio. So Laura, I will pivot to you. If you can just share your role with the fellowship program, a brief introduction, anything you want to add on to what Antonio shared about the fellowship program. And then after you, we'll go to Lauren with those same questions.
Great. Well, thanks so much for having me. I went to law school at American, so exciting to be with my DC people. And actually, Jamie Raskin was my professor there when I did the Marshall Brennan fellowship while I was in law school. So always fun to hear his name. So I am special counsel at Fried Frank. I sit in the New York office, and I run our U.S. pro bono program across our 2 U.S. offices, New York and DC. I think I have the greatest job in big law that there is. And one of the best parts of that job is managing the fellowship program, in addition to our externship program, actually. And so our fellowship program is very special to us. Fellowships have been running for 25 years now. We're heading into our 25th year. And we're super proud of the alumni of that program, who include professors at multiple law schools, multiple federal judges, and folks working at major civil rights organizations around the country, including, of course, LDF and MALDEF, who are the host organizations for our fellowship. So in odd years, Antonio's heard me describe it this way, but this is how I think it's easiest to understand. In odd years, we interview candidates for LDF. So they would come to us for 2 years and be in our litigation department and do all the training that every other junior associate in litigation gets, and do all the same billable work. They have an extra sort of capacity for pro bono work, and they'll work closely with me. And then after 2 years, they move on to the civil rights organization. So this coming year, we're recruiting for LDF, and they'll start in fall 2026, and then 2 years later, go to LDF. And this fall, we will welcome Antonio's successor, who will, and we'll say goodbye to Antonio. And so she will join us for 2 years and then move on to MALDEF. So, I can get into this, I think, a little bit more later, but I guess I would just say what's unique about our program is that we're really looking for people who are interested in the training and experience and frankly networking that starting out in big law allows. And to be successful in this fellowship, you have to have a really deep focused interest in civil rights work. And also you have to be enthusiastic and open-minded about doing corporate work, which most of our billable clients are financial institutions. And, you know, we get you involved in the same kind of work that our general litigation population works on. So we're really looking for people to have a background that will make them successful in both areas.
Lauren, we'll go to you. So same question. Share with us what your role is with the fellowship program and a brief introduction of the EGW.
Sure, great. And sorry, I'm getting a message that my internet is a little unstable, so I apologize. But yeah, so I'm Lauren Hartley, and I am the, my pronouns are she, hers. I am the Associate Director for Network Engagement at Equal Justice Works, with responsibility for the Design Your Own Fellowship program, as we call it. So that's a project-based fellowship. I am an immigration attorney by training and have worked also in law school, public interest advising. So I'm very familiar working with public interest law students and candidates like you all who are here today and like our fellows. And Equal Justice Works is the largest provider of public interest fellowships in the country. We have currently over 160-ish fellows in the field at host organizations that are legal services organizations like LDF and like MALDF, doing a 2-year project that they develop along with their host organization to fulfill an unmet legal need. And our application will open this summer and will be due in September for candidates to start in 2026. And I know we'll get into all of that.
Thank you. And Sam, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself as well. And if you can just tell us a little bit about NALP and what your role is with NALP.
Sure thing. So my name is Sam Halpert. I am the Director of Public Service Initiatives at the National Association for Law Placement, also known as NALP. NALP is a trade association composed of career counselors like Jenny on the law school side and legal employers who focus on recruiting and professional development on the law firm side. So it's a forum where all of the people who think about how people move from being law students to being lawyers can sort of come together and talk stuff through. And specifically, I work with counselors and legal employers who focus on government and civil society legal careers, which is how I come to be here. My role in the presentation is going to be pretty small. I'm talking about a tool that NALP maintains called PSJD and the features of PSJD that are specific to the postgraduate fellowship world. But I do think it's a good year to sort of talk about NALP as an organization more broadly, for reasons that I think will become apparent as we dive into the meat of the panel. That's all I'll say for now. Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Sam. I just want to put an extra plug for psjd.org. It is a website that you will likely use for the rest of your career and should absolutely start using from looking for summer internships. So huge, huge, huge plug for PSJD and lots of gratitude. Okay, so before I get to our panelists, I am going to read some bullet points that Kathleen Rubenstein, who is the executive director of the Skadden Fellowship Foundation, shared with me. I'm not going to take questions because I wouldn't feel comfortable to answer them. And one of the bullet points says this: you can absolutely reach out to Kathleen directly. And I can tell you through personal experience and my students' experience, she is wonderfully responsive and extremely helpful and will be as, I think, transparent as possible. So I've encouraged Washington Council of Lawyers to host an info session later in the spring and summer once we know more so we can hear full details from her. And in the coming weeks, the Skadden Foundation very much anticipates updating their website with the application and information about the application process for next fall. So she's hoping to have that up by the end of this month or early May. In regards to the settlement agreement that I'm sure many of you have read about, with the Skadden, firm, Kathleen is confident that the terms can be implemented in a manner that is wholly consistent with the foundation's longstanding mission of poverty law and in accordance with applicable law. And as always, spring is a great time for students, so more specifically rising 3Ls, 4Es, to do the internal work of really thinking through what some dream jobs might be, and to start considering two main questions of how to pick your project and your host organization. I also want to mention Skadden fellowships are open to folks who are in their last year of law school, so to apply during your last year of law school, and also to folks who have judicial clerkships. So if you have that lined up, then you can apply from there. Most Skadden fellows do start their fellowship right after law school, so a quarter or fewer are applying from judicial clerkships. And I've confirmed that students are 100% welcome to reach out to Kathleen or the general inbox on the website work. So either way, and I believe that Chris is planning to share Kathleen's contact information in a follow-up email. So anyone who RSVP'd will have access to it. Okay. Now we're going to get back to our wonderful panelists. So Antonio, again, I'm starting with you. If you could share with us how you made the decision to apply for your fellowship in the first place and what you have uniquely gained as a fellow.
Sure. That's a really good question. I think there are a couple of threads there. One certainly was that I came into law school to do human rights and sort of pivoted midway through to civil rights, focusing more or less on migrants' rights and the rights of immigrants in the United States. I'm from the Southwest myself originally, and I'm Hispanic, and so that was a community that was particularly important to me. And I was looking at organizations that did strategic impact litigation, like MALDEF, like Latino Justice, PearlDef, those kinds of organizations. And sort of through that research, like you were mentioning just a moment ago, sort of thinking about what my dream job might look like, happened to come across the fellowship while I was researching MALDEF. And so I was intrigued. I mean, I think it's a very unique fellowship in a lot of ways. I mean, it is 4 years. You spend time at 2 different organizations, and something that was particularly appealing to me was this idea of building a bridge between, sort of the private sector work, the big law work, the sort of one track of law school, which is you go through OCI and you work at a firm your 2L summer, and then you stay at the firm after you graduate, and that's your career. Or sort of the public interest side of things, which was what I was passionate about, and knew that I wanted to be doing. But at the same time, I had this sort of fear that I guess you could call it FOMO, that all of my classmates are doing OCI, they're getting wooed by these big firms and talking about all the great training they're going to be getting, and I felt like maybe I was missing out. I was still really committed to going into the public sector, and that was something that I was going to do. And so I sort of had written it off and said, oh, well, I guess that's just not an experience that I'm going to be able to have. And so while I was sort of working through that, coming across this fellowship was sort of the bridge between those two, right? And so I said, wow, what a perfect thing for someone like me who, knows that they want to ultimately end up at a public interest organization and do that kind of work, but still, is kind of interested about what the big law life is like, what kind of work they do, what kind of training do these people get, because that's something that I had heard over and over and over and over again, that you get really formalized training, that you have opportunity to work with attorneys on all sorts of different matters. And to a large extent, I think that has actually borne out. So I think for those reasons, I was particularly interested in pursuing the fellowship just as a way to sort of have a sense of like what are these opportunities that I might not otherwise have access to if I sort of fully commit to going into the public interest space right after law school. In terms of what I have gained as a fellow, I think, I'll point again to, I think the training opportunities have been really, really excellent. And, I will say, I think one of the strengths of the fellowship is that you come in and you join Fried Frank as an associate, as a litigation associate. And in many ways, you are treated exactly the same as any other litigation associate, right? So I really have had the chance to sort of integrate myself into the firm and feel part of the team and work with my colleagues in a way that I would be working with them if I had just gone through the OCI process. So I'm really getting the ability to have that sort of authentic experience. But at the same time, I think the fellowship, I think Laura mentions earlier, is it offers, for example, an expanded pro bono docket, and I get to work really closely with Laura on sort of picking and choosing the types of pro bono cases that I take on. I've had some really, really fantastic and just wonderful experiences, having the opportunity to help draft amicus briefs before the Supreme Court, sort of those sorts of experiences that maybe would have been reserved for someone with a little bit more seniority if they were not participating in the fellowship. And so I've had a lot of really great experiences in that way, being able to, like Laura mentioned also earlier, some of the networking experiences and opportunities, getting to meet people here, not that are working in the private sector, but also, through the pro bono work, getting to go to events with, the Center for Reproductive Rights, or like, these types of events, and meet people who are active in the space. That has been really like a really valuable experience and something that I've really looked forward to. And then the last thing I'll say is that, MALDEF and, Fried Frank obviously do work closely together. It's not just the fellowship. Fried Frank has been engaged with an ongoing pro bono case based out of Texas that MALDEF is also part of, and I have had the opportunity to step into that case and do some work right now. And I anticipate continuing to work on that case once I join MALDEF. And so I think that's kind of a really fun experience, being able to work on this case from the firm side, from the pro bono side, but then being able to join MALDEF and continue that work now being at the organization itself. So I think those are some of the pluses that I've really, really appreciated about the fellowship. And, it's also just nice, I think for a lot of public interest students, it can be really stressful, the sort of, 1 year bits and bobs that you're doing, trying to like get your footing in your career. And so having sort of a plan for 4 years of what I'm going to be doing and how I'm going to be doing it has been really comforting and has allowed me to like focus on career development and these networking opportunities in a way that I might not have been able to do if I were really more focused on trying to figure out what my next step was going to be.
Thank you so much. This fellowship really embodies like the substance of conversations that I often have with my law students about like, do I go private or do I go public? And I'm like, guys, the beauty of like being a lawyer is we don't have to have this like black and white dichotomy between those two things, right? Like I used to work at the DC Bar Pro Bono Center. So I was working with all these private sector attorneys doing tons of pro bono work. So it's just a really cool, it's just really cool. And the length of it is really unique. So thank you so much for sharing. Okay, we're going to pivot to Lauren, to EJW. So Lauren, can you share what makes a host organization successful? And to just also talk about like host organization capacity that you're aware of in this moment.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jenny. Yeah, so like I've said, with Equal Justice Works, one of the unique features, of our program is that it's a project-based fellowship. So the candidate, so you, the student who's potentially applying, and the host organization in our process are really hopefully working together to design that project. So a few things. We recommend, host organizations that are really looking to work with you, the candidate, to build a project that is going to be successful for both of you. So taking into account your special skills, your background, your interests, and making that a part of the process. We look for, of course, mission alignment. So is this something that the organization is already doing sort of relatedly? Like the project does need to address something new, but we talk about it like we say it needs to be innovative, but it's not like you're reinventing the wheel, right? Are you providing a new type of legal services to a client group that they already serve? Or it could be that you're providing a type of legal services they already provide to a new client group, like kind of just like a step a little bit further of what they're doing. So that we like to see that there's like mission alignment with what the organization already does. We occasionally will see applications where a candidate and host org have proposed something that's very, very different from everything that the organization already does. And it's hard to see how that's going to succeed, right? Is there the infrastructure in place? Is there the knowledge in place? Are there the networks and support in place for that to work? So I think there's like a happy medium of doing something new, but also it kind of being aligned with what the organization is already doing. And then we get questions about size, right? Like organization size is large organization, small organization. I think we sort of like defer to the candidate and the organization on that. I will say, if it's a very small organization of like 3 or 4 attorneys, I would think really carefully about that because as a new attorney, as a young associate, you need supervision, right? You need someone who's going to be there to support you. Very often we see, if maybe someone takes a different job elsewhere and somebody else goes out on medical leave or family leave, and then maybe a fellow is kind of stuck with kind of minimal supervision. So that may not be a recipe for a project to succeed. So I would just think really carefully about that. And our host organizations don't have to be specifically legal services organizations, but they do need to have legal staff, right? So it could be an organization that also does community outreach and education and social services and all sorts of other things, as long as they're also supervising attorneys who are on staff. So it does need to be licensed attorneys that are going to be there supervising the candidate. And then the other note that I'll make, we talked about kind of like what's happening at this moment in time. For example, immigration organizations are facing a lot of challenges around funding right now. Other types of organizations may be facing challenges around funding. So that's something I would encourage, candidates to do, and to the extent that you're working with your law school professional or people that may know the organization, to do a little looking into what that means, kind of how they're situated. Organizations that have a wide array of funding are going to be a bit more resilient in this moment, right? So I know as a law student, I wasn't necessarily thinking about that, but if you have a nonprofit that's funded by one major grant, then that means you're going to be really vulnerable to changes in funding of that particular grant. If you are an organization that has multiple sources of funding, then you're more likely to have some resilience. So that's information you can sort of see. You can look at like their 990 from the last year. You can ask the host organization. You can ask their might be a little bit surprising for them, but it's something you can ask about kind of what are their sources of funding and what does that look like. So that's something I would also think about as well.
That is a very helpful tip. We got a question about whether you're referring to JDs or LLMs, and just because I know about EJW, can you just share in general who is eligible for EJW?
Yes. So for Equal Justice Works, the candidate needs to have employment authorization for the 2 years of the fellowship term. So our fellowship term, the upcoming year starts in 2026 and it goes through 2028. The candidate needs to already have that in place. And I'll also clarify the host for us, the host organization we say is the legal services organization, or the organization that's hosting you is your employer. So you also need to make sure that you're meeting any eligibility that they may have set out. And sometimes there's things related to if they've got a union, something like that. I see a question about a public. Do you want to answer this?
Yes, but the question that I meant to ask was whether I think it was JD or LLM students I wonder if the internet is shaking.
Right. So it could be.
Uh-oh. Okay, Lauren, I'm gonna.
Right. So,
The internet is a bit
it could-
shaky. Uh,
yeah.
okay, I'm gonna pivot to Laura, and then we'll come back to you when internet is feeling more stable. So Laura, can you talk, we've heard a little bit about the fellowship placement. So this is like it's a different model. I'm also going to throw a question at you because Antonio is sort of sharing like the value of the experience at Fried Frank. And I would love to hear from you what kind of feedback you get from LDF and MALDEF about your fellows who you send there. And then if you can also talk about the application process for Fried Frank and how it likely differs from like a project fellowship, like an EJW application.
Sure. So, I mean, obviously our fellowship's been going on for a very long time. And one of the reasons is that MALDEF and LDF love our fellows, and several of them have stayed at MALDEF and LDF and are in extremely senior roles, including at LDF. The most senior role is an alum of our program. So terrific feedback. And also that provides like another layer of mentoring. So when our LDF fellow left last year to head over to LDF, like there were multiple people there in the legal department who had gone through the exact same fellowship program and were there to, bring her in, and in some cases had already been working with her on litigation projects. So that is really great. And I'll also say, like, just on the note of feedback, that the feedback from our partners here at the firm is also excellent, and they love working with the fellows and teaching them about their area of practice. I'm just looking at exactly how you phrased your question. Oh, I mean, how is the placements different? Obviously, you don't choose the organization. You're bound by who we're staffing that year. So sometimes people ask me like, well, what if I have a particular affinity for one of those groups over the other? And, unfortunately the answer is like, then you have to wait a year if it's not that year. And that could be a year that you clerk or maybe participate in some other one-year fellowship program. We would be open to meeting a candidate who had participated in something like that. We're not, though, open to candidates who've been working for a few years. We're really looking for someone who is entry level. So coming out of a clerkship, maybe coming out of some sort of very short fellowship, or coming right out of law school is also fine. Have I answered everything, Jenny?
Can you talk about the application?
Oh, the application, sure. So our application is available on our website. You can Google it and it'll pop up, or it's available through the pro bono page. Basically, we look at your transcript. We are looking at least 2 letters of recommendation from, it could be professors, could be a judge you clerked for, could be supervisor on an internship or externship. We're looking for a personal statement about why the fellowship resonates for you. And then also a sample of your writing. And I'll say too, candidly, like when we're looking at the transcript, we're looking for strong grades, and also we're looking to see that you've taken some classes in areas that are relevant to being a associate at a large corporate law firm. So, that is sort of part of the calculus. And we will open that process like late summer, and we take our applications until early October. And we try to sort of stay on track with the other fellowship programs represented here, so that people don't have to, not know what happened with their other application. My understanding is that there are people who might look at our fellowship and also look at another fellowship. So, so we will notify everyone by the holidays.
Great, thank you. Lauren, how's the internet? Are we feeling stable? Okay, we'll give it a try.
Okay.
Okay, so I think the next question we have, because I saw you responded to the JDLM question in the chat, is if you can talk about what projects make up the bread and butter of the fellowship work generally. Oh, no, we can't hear you.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. Again, sorry, can you repeat? I closed all my other documents to make sure to free up bandwidth. Can you repeat the question, Jenny?
Yes, yeah. So the question is just some insight into the types of projects that make up the bread and butter of the EJW fellows work generally.
That's a great question. It really varies. We have more than 75 candidates per class the last couple of years. And they're doing projects all over the country in all different types of work. Typically, the projects are some combination of direct representation, maybe policy advocacy, impact litigation, community outreach, combination thereof. Certainly lots of projects in things like education and special education. We've traditionally had a lot of projects in immigration, many projects in civil rights and civil justice reform, veterans work, disability rights, so a few environmental law, really kind of all over. So it's hard to say kind of what bread and butter, but I would say is that there's lots of kind of major public interest organizations that folks would be maybe familiar with in your city. We've probably had a fellow there at some point. So, here in DC, certainly in Chicago, the Legal Aid Society, in Los Angeles, I think at the Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles. Just all over the country. From local legal aid to large national impact organizations. So really a little bit about everything. We say, if there is a project that is of interest and a good fit for your background and a good fit for the host organization, we encourage you to explore it.
Great, thank you. Okay, the next two questions, I'll start with Lauren and then go to Laura, but same questions for you both. What's the ideal timing on when to start? And how many applicants apply and how many are accepted? So Lauren, we'll start with you and then Laura, you go right after.
So our application will open in May, and you can see examples from last year already still on our website, but we'll have updated versions on our website in May. And the application will close in September. So candidates who are looking to apply will ideally be developing that over the course of the summer. Earlier is better. Please don't wait until the last minute. Give yourself plenty of time to review. Our process also includes letters of recommendation. So you want to make sure that you're requesting those ahead of time. There's a lot of different pieces to the application. So there is a personal statement. There's also kind of proposed goals, a statement of work. There's also a piece that the host organization needs to fill out. So it is a collaborative process that needs review from a lot of different stakeholders. We also encourage candidates to have other people review the materials. So maybe that's your law school professional, folks at your host organization, alumni of the program, if you know any who are from your law school, for example, or maybe involved, things like that. So get started. If you're applying for our upcoming cycle, keep an eye out. We'll be doing a series of, webinars and information sessions once our application cycle opens, and then be available throughout the summer. And then if you're thinking ahead, if you're a 1L or looking ahead, I think you can just keep it in mind as you go through your public interest career. So as you go through your internships, as you're hearing from panelists or practitioners in your classes or on panels, I think you can just keep an ear out for the kind of work that is interesting and also gaps that maybe haven't yet been filled. And sorry, to answer your second question, so how many people apply? So last cycle we had a little over 300 applicants, and we're looking to seat a class of about 60 fellows.
So our process, as I said, will open probably late summer, and applications are due by early October, and we finalize our candidate by the holidays. And we'll bring a small number of candidates to our New York office for in-person multi-round interviews in around November, like early November. The number of applicants really varies year to year, so I don't even really want to give it a number. I would say that, you know, I know there's a lot of 1Ls in the webinar now, and it's really not too early to start thinking about this if you think if it resonates for you, if you think that that this is the right track, because some of our strongest candidates have externed or interned for MALDEF or LDF, the organization that they might ultimately go to. And so they have gotten to know members of the legal team. They understand the mission and what the work is going to be. They feel confident that they will be happy working there. So I think that if this sounds exciting to you, start thinking about your coursework and start thinking about trying to land an externship at one of those organizations or a similar civil rights organization, so that you can really, you know, speak in a focused way about exactly like the area of civil rights work that you want to practice in, because the organizations obviously have a very wide-ranging portfolio of work and will take into consideration what it is that you want to do. And I should have mentioned this too, that MALDEF and LDF interview for this fellowship alongside us. So we participate depending on the organization and depending on the stage. We might sit side by side in the room together or do a separate round. Sort of depends on volume and depends on the organization, but it's a process that we work on very closely together to make sure that it's like the right fit for both.
Thank you. And I'll mention that historically, the SCADN application has been due about a week before EJW's application. It's usually early September. However, my tip to students is to do the EJW application first, because I think the EJW application demands you to really flesh out your project and like think it through in an extremely deep way. And then SCADN is a little bit higher level, just like 4 essay questions, whereas EJW, it is like a grant application. Like you are going 6-month increment, goal by goal. So that is my tip. Okay, I'm supposed to ask what the application looks like. I think you've both talked a bit about that. So I think what students probably really want to hear is, what are common mistakes that you see? What are things that will make an application stand out to you in a positive way? And then to also share what makes for a strong interview and what makes for a weak interview. So let's start with Laura, and then Antonio. I want you to plug in so we can hear your side of it, and then we'll go to Lauren on EJW.
Sure. So what are common mistakes people make? I think maybe overlooking the firm piece of it is sort of like the common you know, maybe pitfall. We don't typically have candidates who are like overly interested in the firm piece and like not so focused on the civil rights piece. It's usually more if someone isn't sort of evenly matched, it's usually weighing more towards like that they really want to get to LDF or MALDEF. And so I think maybe sort of failure to research what it is that we do and the types of corporate clients that we work with, and the areas of private sector litigation that you might be interested in working in. So that we're going to ask you, you know, if you come here and the litigation practice manager asked you, what would you like to be staffed on? We'd like to hear a well-reasoned, you know, presentation on that you might be interested in real estate litigation or IP litigation or white collar or whatever it is, and some good explanations for that. And, you know, again, I've said it before, and maybe it's obvious, but we are really looking for a strong academic record. And I think a strong writing sample is super, super important. So have multiple people read it, like really check it for typos and grammar and everything. And I should have said this before, you know, as far as like, when can you start preparing? As you're interning or working for a professor or whatever you're doing, starting to develop some letters of recommendation from those folks, even if they're not quite tailored to this program yet, but at least, you know, a draft that is fresh in the supervisor's mind about what it is that you did there, I think would be a really valuable thing to do, especially if you're, you know, still a 1L. just start to get those going, because the letters that we receive tend to be very substantive, with details about the type of work that was assigned. And so you don't want to be in a position where you have a letter of recommendation that's like, they were a lovely colleague and they were a hard worker and they were on time every day. That's not like what we're looking for. We're really looking to see the substance of what you did and the type of critical thinking that we in the organization need. Antonio, what did I leave out?
I think you hit a lot of the key points. I definitely think that, like you said, a pitfall is candidates who, apply and, sometimes will even just show sort of distaste for the private sector or working in big law. They're just sort of like, yeah, I'll hold my nose and like get through 2 years. And I think that like isn't good for the firm, obviously, but it's also not good for the candidate, right? Like we don't want to be putting someone here at the firm who's going to spend 2 years being totally miserable working on cases that they hate. So I think, it's definitely, you don't necessarily have to have a resume that shows that you have spent a ton of time in the corporate world, but I think, being able to show some sort of genuine interest for the kind of work that the firm does is important. And I think, on the flip side of that too, it can be most candidates obviously have sort of strong public interest resumes, but sometimes if the specific focus is not aligned with the work that MALDEF or LDF does, that can, be it can make it a difficult sort of an uphill battle for that candidate. If they're real, MALDEF, for example, has an education focus and labor and immigrants' rights, but if the person is really, really, really focused on health law, and that's, the sort of everything the resume has, it can kind of be hard to say like, okay, it's great that you have this interest in public health, but why do you want to jump over to MALDEF and do like the voting rights work or the education work that they have? So I think that can sometimes be difficult. Otherwise, I think some of the things that make candidates stand out, are going to be obviously, the good grades, things like Laura was saying, like having really strong recommenders. I think also having practical skills in litigation is always a good thing. If it's whether that's through a clinic at your law school, or being able to show like a litigation focused externship or internship. Those are definitely things that we really like to see, just to sort of show that you'll be able to sort of like hit the ground running. I think a clerkship similarly, kind of ticks that box to show that you have not just public interest experience, but also like the litigation focus as well. But otherwise, I think that's it really. It is definitely just, I think, showing the open mind and the demonstrated interest in both the private and public sectors, which can be a little tricky for some applicants.
Thank you. Antonio, before you go, can you come back off mute? Just like 1 minute, because I have to be sensitive about time here, but can you just tell us what your experience was like interviewing for the fellowship?
Sure. Yeah. I actually did. So I think the MALDEF and LDF have slightly different interview practices. So LDF, I think, does, as I understand it, maybe 2 rounds of interviews where you'll, interview with the firm and then you'll do an interview with LDF. My interview for MALDEF was actually all in one. It was, the folks from MALDEF and the folks from the firm all together in a Zoom room. I actually did it remote. It was now at this point back in 2022, or 2023, so slightly different times. But I think it was a lot of pretty standard questions, that you'd expect to get. Why are you interested in the fellowship? What are you interested about in the private sector and the public sector? Why is MALDEF interesting to you? Sort of those kinds of classic questions. I think even though this is not a project fellowship, it's also good to sort of brainstorm like what you might bring to the organization. So, I do remember getting asked like, what would a project be that you would, or like a type of case that you would want to see MALDEF take on. And so I'd given that some thought, and I did not have it anywhere near as developed as, I would if I were doing something similar for EJW, but that was something that I had thought about. But yeah, I mean, otherwise it's I think a pretty standard interview process, but they are really going to try and pull out of you, like, are you interested? Are you going to have a good time here at the firm? And are you going to, be able to jump in and zealously advocate for MALDEF's positions once you're at that organization?
Thank you so much. Okay, Lauren, we're going to pivot to you, but I want to be kind of tailored in my question. Can you share with the audience what the process is for reviewing EJW applications? I just think it's so unique how it starts with like real experts and then gets sent off to sponsors. So if you could just share that. And another really common question that I get from folks is sort of how much the candidate is considered versus the project. And I know EJW is unique in that it does not require a transcript, so your GPA is unknown. But yes, if you could talk about those two things in particular.
Yeah, good questions. Okay. So I think I'll take the second one first because that plays into the interview process and like how our process works. So I would say like we really look for and in your application materials to demonstrate that you are the right candidate for this project, right? This is a very specific project. So what makes you, the candidate, the best fit? And what means that you're going to be able to make it succeed? So what are you showing in your resume, in your personal statement, in the letters of recommendation? Everything that you're submitting kind of works together to show like who you are. And then I will say then to talk about our interview process. So last year I said, we had 84 different fellows, and between them they had over 80 something sponsors. Some of those are individual sponsors, some of like one firm or a family foundation or a corporation. Or sometimes a private individual who is sponsoring a fellowship. Sometimes those folks are paired and they're co-sponsoring together. So how it works for us is that we go to our sponsors and we work throughout the year to kind of bring them in and get them to commit to sponsoring a fellow. And they let us know what they're interested in. So I have a sponsor who was a former elementary school librarian. And so she's very passionate about education and public education. And she came into some family money and as a lowly human came to us and said, hey, I want to sponsor a fellow. So she looks for candidates who are working in the special education field. For her, in those interviews, she's looking very much for like the personal connection and loves to see candidates who have been teachers before or kind of worked in public education. That's what she connects to. I have other sponsors that are major law firms, right? And a corporate client and a corporate legal department, and they work together. And maybe they are their priority is looking for a project where they could maybe do pro bono together. So they are really spending some time as in their interview digging into what the pro bono opportunities are. That's part of our application is giving possible pro bono opportunities. That's something that the candidate thinks through, but also really the host organization is really important in really helping develop that. And the supervisors are really helpful in developing possible pro bono pieces there. And I would say when a candidate is not aware of any of those pieces, that comes out in the interview. So sometimes that can be the biggest detractor is when a candidate is like not as invested. Maybe it's kind of come top down from the host organization. And the candidate is not as like knowledgeable about the process. That can be a real drawback. I think I might have frozen.
You did, but I think you're back. I think you're with us.
Okay, I'm sorry. There's like Verizon trucks out on the street, so I don't know if that has anything to do with it. Of course. Did that answer the questions, Jenny?
Yeah. Did you talk about the first review, like who does the first review of the application?
Okay, so yes, so applications are due in September, and then typically we ask our alumni to do kind of a first review of the applications because we're not technical experts or substantive experts in all of these issue areas. And so, we look for typically try to identify at least 2 alumni who are experienced in that field or related field to kind of review the application and give us some feedback on it. In the past, it's been more of like a score, but I would say now that's moved more to like qualitative feedback of like, do you think these goals are realistic? Does it seem like this candidate has a good handle on other people working this space? For example, I work with a lot of candidates in DC and in New York, a lot of fellows there's a lot of organizations in those cities. There's a lot of pro bono that's already happening in those cities. So what makes your project distinct, and what are you really filling a legal need? And I know when I was a law student, I certainly didn't have a great idea of all the actors working in a space, right? So like, I'd be like, well, what about this? Someone should be doing that. And then, someone with experience could be like, oh, well, someone is. Actually, it's like those people over there. So I think that's a really important piece. If you are looking in a city that's relatively like a large legal market, there's probably a lot of organizations already. So I think that's something to be really like mindful of. That's one thing that comes out through that review as well.
Thank you. Yeah, an interesting question. So Justice Catalyst is another fellowship funder. And one of the questions that they ask on their like pre-application application, their prospectus, is like to literally list like who have you spoken with and who are you planning to speak with. And I think keeping that question in mind for developing a project for any of these funders would be really important, especially for exactly what you're talking about, Lauren. Like, is this already being done? But I think what's so unique about EJW is like you're writing an application for both like experts in the field and also a potential sponsor that may know very little about in the weeds. And so you want to write for both audiences in a way, or at least that's what I tell my students. Okay, I think we're like right on time to pivot to Sam. So Sam is going to give us a presentation on NALP, and then we will come back for questions from the audience for any of our panelists.
Thanks so much, Jenny.
Yes, I'm supposed to give you a prompt. I'm sorry. How is NALP navigating current events in regards to the resources they're making available?
That is a great question. Thank you so much. It's tricky. I think a lot of what NALP is able to offer at the moment in terms of the way our systems are set up is a historical perspective, right? We have a lot of tools, and you'll see them in a minute, that are designed to give you a view into what has happened in past years on the basis that the cycles that postgraduate fellowships move in are fairly stable, and that you can use past activity as a predictor of future activity to plan your postgraduate fellowship search. For those of you that are 1Ls, that's a big part of sort of how we've built our tools and the purpose to which we've put them, which means that 2025 is a tricky year. As I said, I am on staff at a trade association. It's a community of professionals that includes career counselors like Jenny, and also folks on the legal employer side. We're talking a lot about how we have to go through all of the resources in our resource library and identify gaps or materials that need to be updated. I shot off a note to some of my colleagues during this presentation to mention that looking at what we have, I don't think we have anything, but the first step is going to be to see if we have anything that speaks to this. Looking at what we have and developing or sourcing materials, if we don't have anything, to help people think through the finances of an organization is probably a really important area to get into. When somebody was talking about this earlier, they mentioned Form 990s. Nonprofits greater than a certain size have to file some financial disclosures with the IRS, and that's a source of it. Many nonprofits will also publish financial statements, official audited financial statements, and also annual financial reports. I'm using the NAACP LDF as an example here because two reasons. They've come up in the course of this presentation, but also they have them laid out so beautifully on their website. I was very happy to see as I was sort of poking around. And so for many organizations, they have a lot of transparency. It's intended, I think, mostly for potential donors or current donors to sort of understand. But if that's something that is a bigger concern this year, either just in general for job seekers or for potential funders of project-based fellowships, thinking about what we can do to sort of help people navigate those documents or even be aware of them is something that is literally on my list after this evening. Uh, we also have to, so that's sort of the resource library is going to be the easiest thing, I think, to adapt. The tools that we have, I'm going to be thinking about ways that we can make them more accommodating, but it is more likely going to require just a little bit more thoughtfulness as you engage with them, because part of what we do is present a picture of the way things have gone in the past and just having an understanding that the relationship between past fellowship cycles and the upcoming fellowship cycles may be weaker than it's been in prior years, I think is important. We don't have a good sense of what things look like yet. We, the association that I am on staff for, the public service section, are talking about this all the time, weekly, and we are connecting with folks that work on the funding side of fellowships. And as soon as they think enough dust will have settled that they have more insight, we are going to reconvene. We were talking about this just last week, and trying to get a sense of, when is a good time to talk about this? When is there going to be more insight? Those are not conversations that law students or prospective fellows are necessarily going to be welcome at, but your career office absolutely is. And so toward the end of May, beginning of June, I'm hoping that we're going to be able to have a conversation within our association on these sorts of topics. And you can ask your career services staff if they keep an eye out for that and make sure that they participate, and they'll be able to help anything that we learn when we come together filter down to you. So that is an answer about how what we do relates to what is going on this year. To talk more generally about what it is that we do and my sort of statements about the historical perspective that we offer will come into greater focus, I think. PSJD.org was founded around the turn of the century by law students. It's since become a project that's come under the umbrella of NELP. It's the simplest way to describe it would be it's idealist, but specifically for law jobs. So it's public sector jobs, government, civil society, including jobs at law firms that have predominant public interest focus. So like, pro bono partners at a law firm would be an exception to our typical posting criteria. That require or prefer candidates with legal training, which is all of you. It is free for employers to use. It is free for job seekers to use. It is paid for by law school subscriptions, which is a way of saying I am not trying to capture any information or fund this project in a clandestine fashion through your engagement with the platform. We are transparent about where the money comes from this, and it is not from all of you. We try to make it easy for employers to engage with, easy for job seekers to engage with, and you can thank schools for that. There are a bunch of different things that happen on this website. I've talked a little bit about our resource center, which is here in this Explore Advice tab. There is a section that pertains to postgraduate fellowships where you can find some of the information that was laid out tonight in written form. As I've mentioned, something that we are looking at as a section urgently is reviewing all of the materials in our resource library and trying to identify what pieces of them need to be updated to accommodate dramatic changes in our field. That's going to be an ongoing project that isn't going to happen overnight, but we do have a variety of materials here. And if you notice anything about them that leaves you with questions, you can absolutely get in touch with me. If you write to this email address, you will reach me. You may reach one of my colleagues first, but if your question is something that I'm going to need to be involved with to answer, you're going to get to me eventually. So that's our resource center. We have a directory of employers, which is a profile of every employer that has advertised a position on PSJD within the last several years. If an employer doesn't engage with the site for more than 5 years, the profile is deactivated to try to keep it relatively up to date. That means that if you're trying to figure out if there's anyone who might be an appropriate host organization for a project that you're imagining in a particular area of the country, you can try to search there and you will find employers who are not necessarily actively recruiting at the moment. So that can be helpful. And then we have our jobs database, which is the core thing that people tend to think about, which is a clearinghouse for jobs like the ones I've described. Government, civil society jobs that require or prefer candidates with legal training. For the most part, these positions are going to be jobs that are actively recruiting candidates. For example, you can see here, this is one that was posted on April 8th and has a deadline of June 30th. This one was posted on March 5th and has a rolling deadline, which means that we'll leave it on the site for about 3 months, but now I'm getting into the weeds. You'll see a few of these have this little historical plinth marker. And if you hover over it, it says archival notice. This is specifically a feature for postgraduate fellowships. And this is what I mean about PSJD offering a historical perspective. If you were a 3L and you're just trying to find a job right now, it's easy to turn that off. And then it will only show you things that are actively searching. But because often fellowships recur on an annual basis or a biennial basis, it can be useful to look at prior announcements. For example, we have 452 entries in the organizational postgraduate fellowship category right now. I'll get into what these categories mean in a moment. Some of them are active, some of them are not. The Fried-Frank Civil Rights Fellowship is not active, but you can see that it was last advertised in September of 2024 with a deadline of the first week of October. And so assuming that that fellowship follows a predictable pattern, someone trying to plan what a 2L, for example, trying to plan what next fall might look like, would know to keep an eye out for this fellowship to hit our system around this time of year. That's what I mean about how we do things, historically. And only fellowships receive this kind of treatment, because only fellowships, unlike the other positions that we advertise, fall into this cyclical behavior. We divide the fellowships in the system into a few different categories. You've heard about these categories from the perspective of the fellowship funders, or the fellows that are working within them, because we're looking at the legal hiring process. We try to categorize them based on what the experience is like for candidates, right? So there's a big difference between organizational fellowships that are internally funded and project-based fellowships. In terms of, as I think you've heard, the hiring process and sort of the number of stages that are involved. If it's a project fellowship, you've got to find a host organization first, and then you and the host organization work together on a proposal. And let me know if this is an unfair description, Lauren, but essentially, when you have that proposal, your next step is to convince EJW to be your talent agent, essentially, to make a commitment to you to sort of represent you to funders and say, we've got this great idea, we would love to see it get funded. And then so there's yet another sort of stage to it, right? You've got to find somebody to develop a project with you, you've got to get representation, you've got to get an agent, and then you can get a booking, and then you are headlining. The organizational fellowships that are internally funded have a more streamlined process because there's just the one funder, and you convince them that they should be working with you, and there's that. The clinical and academic fellowships that we haven't heard much about tonight are similar to the organizational fellowships. It's just one um, step because they're funded by the university that is putting up the fellowship. We have them in a different track just because they tend to put you in a slightly different career path. You can do clinical work and a clinical fellowship and then go out, into practice. But many of those will sort of steer you into legal academia, or at least there's the possibility that they will. The other thing that I wanted to point out with this, and I threw this in as an answer to the Q&A, someone was asking, are there any that work on things that aren't sort of civil rights focused? One thing that you can do, you can see here, I'm looking at all three types simultaneously, but I've narrowed it to positions that mention environmental law, right? And so if you're interested in issues that are not necessarily civil rights focused, you can see what kinds of fellowships have been advertised in the past, right? So here's a 2-year consumer law fellowship with the National Association of Consumer Advocates that was advertised last October. And so if you're interested in a particular area, you can look for employers and you can try to pitch somebody a project. You can also get a sense of whether any fellows, any organizations have tried to get a fellowship started in that area of law in the past. And there are lots of different legal areas that you can search on to see what you're able to find. So the strength of PSJD for this postgraduate job search is trying to look at what's happened before as well as what's currently being offered, to get a sense of what is possible. The last thing that I'll note as you do this, if you look for fellowships specifically, you get this new button up at the top of our sidebar, which invites you to view these things as a calendar. Again, fellowships get special attention in our system because they are the only jobs that we use this calendar view for. There's no year on this calendar. It just says April. And that's because, again, these things are cyclical. So if you are trying to think about what you might be looking for, say, next September, we can go forward into September and see here's the Fried Frank Civil Rights Fellowship when it hit our system on September 16th of last year, right? And at the moment, I'm only looking 2 years back in our system. You can look as many as 5 years back to get a really long-term view of what the fellowship world has looked like. And these are not fellowships that actually happened, right? These are all of the attempts that different legal organizations made to try and get something started for themselves in partnership with a fellow. So this is going to be a different sort of view into this stuff than you would get. Doesn't like going back 5 years. I will have to take a look at why. It's a different view into this data than you would get if you look at a list of the fellows that EJW has funded in the past, because that'll show you, the ones that actually materialized. Whereas you may discover in here that there's an organization that's been trying to get a fellow for a couple of years and hasn't necessarily been successful. That is briefly an introduction to the specific tools on our system that are designed to speak to this world. NALP and PSJD are not directly offering any of these fellowships, but we try to help everyone stay on top of what this process looks like year to year across all the different projects that are out there, all the different opportunities that are out there. And this is going to be a harder year than many have been in the past. And we'll be doing our best to keep up with events as they unfold. Thanks, Jenny.
Pam, thank you so much. And I just learned so much about tools that I wasn't aware of on PSJD, which I am going to probably start using tomorrow. So thank you. Okay, I'm gonna give 3 quick little pointers that have come to my mind, and then we're gonna open it up to audience questions. So a conversation I am often finding myself having with students is like should I even try for a project fellowship? It's so competitive and it's so much work and I'm tired. And yes, I respond, I'm not going to make you do this. Like, no, not at all. There is no pressure from me. And also, I see through the years that I have done this, the value of going through the process. And I don't know if it's self-selecting or what it is, but do all of my project fellowship applicants get project fellowships? Absolutely not. No, not the majority of them. And they all land in what ends up being usually a dream position for them. And I don't know, again, like, I don't know why that is. Like, is it because they just like had all this experience, like completing an unusually long application or going through interview prep or whatever it is? But I do think that there is value beyond whether you land the particular fellowship you're going for. You're also building a relationship with the host organization. And so sometimes they will find a way to bring you on, even if it's not through the project fellowship. Okay, I'm going to shut up about that. Those are my 2 cents. My other suggestion is to just research the crap out of what you're applying for. Who got those fellowships? Stalk them on LinkedIn. What were their experiences? What did they do, right? Like Laura's saying to the 1Ls, like, if you want this, it's not too early. Start thinking about the experience you're getting. And by the way, you need beyond outstanding like recommendations. Go see where were people coming from, right? And same thing goes for the project fellowships. EJW has a fantastic directory. And so you can go and look up projects based on the field that you are interested in to see what do they actually fund. Like, this is what Lauren said, but like, what do they actually do? I'm sure it lines up beautifully. But I just think there's no better way than to actually see who is getting the fellowships and what projects are getting funded. The last thing I'm going to say, because I get a lot of like hesitation about like, how the hell do I find a host? And truly every which way people find hosts, truly, truly, truly through cold outreach has worked. I'm telling you because I have seen it. I wouldn't have said this in my first year of counseling, but now I am going to tell you that it is true. Even if it is a host that is not posting for, hosting a fellow, if you are just like, so like, you're like, oh my gosh, these are the people who need to supervise the project that I want to do, just reach out. At worst, they ignore you or say no. Okay. Audience questions. That's what we're here for. Chris, do you wanna?
Yeah, so from the questions in the Q&A, thank you all for putting your questions in the Q&A. Please feel free to continue to put questions in the Q&A, and there are answered questions. So if you'd like to take a look at the answers that are typed in, that's fantastic. One that I wanted to highlight now is there formal support for fellows as they transition into their next position? And is there community between and within the fellowship cohort? So I'll pass that, Jenny, whoever you think should take that one first.
Sorry, can you read it again? I was reading the questions while you said it. I'm sorry.
No worries. The formal support for fellows as they transition into their next position, networking opportunities, job placement, alumni mentorship, and is there community between fellows within the fellowship cohort?
Okay. Let's start with Laura, and then we'll go to Lauren. I think both of you.
Sure. So to be honest, this was something that I identified as that we needed to do more of when I came back to the firm a couple of years ago, that some of our fellowship alumni knew each other because they worked at the host organization at the same time, or maybe just knew each other from like law school alumni things or some other coincidence. But in the last couple of years, we've tried to make a concerted effort to introduce our fellows to alumni of the program, and we've hosted a couple of dinners in New York and DC to bring them together. We've hosted alumni of the fellowship to speak to our associates here at the firm during like various heritage months, or just like while they happen to be in town to just talk about new initiatives. And some of them work at public interest organizations where we do pro bono that are not MALDEF or LDF. So we have also gotten to know them in that way. But that is one of my, I can't say it's a goal, but that is an ongoing focus for me, to make sure that it's part of a community that you're joining. And I actually think that that's one of the most special things about our fellowship is it's not a giant community, but the people in it are so extraordinary. And so getting to just like sit at the table with them is so cool. And like you are the MALDEF fellow, but you're meeting leadership from the LDF fellowship too, and vice versa. So that also sort of expands your network.
Yeah, so for Equal Justice Works, we've been around for almost 40 years, so we now have more than 2,700 alumni. So it looks a little different for us. So we've got a lot of folks all over the country. We do have an alumni advisory council that puts on some learning and networking throughout the year. We have some receptions. Those do tend to be in larger legal markets, so DC, New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, for example. We've got a June board meeting in Chicago, so we'll have a reception there, and all of our alumni are invited. And then we certainly have groups of alumni and current fellows that will then be communicating with each other, especially around particular areas of interest. So like this last couple of years, we've had a pretty active kind of subgroup of fellows that do heirs property work or like tangled title work. It's a bit more of a niche. And so they've kind of from across the country have formed a group where they were kind of meeting virtually on like a monthly basis. So that kind of varies. And then in terms of like formal support, we don't have like super formal support, but I would say like maybe 60% of our fellows stay with their host organization after they finish up. And then another large chunk transition to a different organization in a different part of the country that they've already done it. Maybe, their partner is going to med school or they're going back home or whatever, that kind of thing. So they transition. But we do make some connections. I am a former career counselor myself, so I have office hours in the spring with kind of my fellows who are in their second year. And if they want to have a conversation with me about connections or alumni network or job search, we're happy to do that. And our alumni I often will like connect them to different alumni who are always like super happy to help. We have around 86% of our fellows stay in public interest immediately following the fellowship, and many stay in for many years as well.
Awesome, thank you. I know, by the way, for Skadden, they just had their in-person symposium last week or 2 weeks ago, where they bring together like the folks in their second year, the folks in their first year, and the folks who, received the fellowship to start in that fall. And just from talking to the folks who are 3Ls at Georgetown, there was, I think, a really strong sense of community and camaraderie there. Really, really strong. Okay, and I know it's something in the past that I've been told Skadden considers in their applications, that they want to make sure the candidate is someone who would be a positive contribution to the Skadden community, because it is something that they really highly value.
I note too, Jenny, it's quite smaller. So Skadden typically picks like 28 fellows. So they just have like a smaller group that they're working with. So just something to sort of keep in mind, one of the differences in various programs.
Yes, it is much smaller, usually 28. Okay, Lauren, there was a question in the chat earlier about whether EJW would fund civil work at a public defender's office. And maybe if you could just also clarify what EJW's limitations are and openness is to, the criminal work.
Yeah, sure. So we do not fund traditional straight criminal defense. There are organizations you may have heard of that do holistic defense, like the Bronx Defenders, for example, is a very well-known organization. So one of our requirements is the organization has to be a 501c3. I was unfamiliar with this, but in New York, public defense is done contracted through 501c3 organizations, which makes Bronx Defenders, even though they do public defense work, they are a 501c3 and they also do civil legal defense. We've had a number of fellows over the years that do that type of work. And there are some other cities and counties that have that sort of structure as well. So it's actually kind of like tax like formation structure question that you have to think about first. But then after that, we certainly have fellows who do work, some post-conviction work that otherwise there is no like constitutional right to, for example, or reentry support or like expungement, second chance work is very popular. Yeah, so we do sort of, and you can see examples on our website. We have a fellow like archive. It's called like Meet Our Fellows page, and you can see examples of fellows who have done that type of work. So definitely check that out if you're interested.
Oh, you're on mute, Jenny.
Okay. Any other questions from the Q&A that we should bring in?
I see
Yeah.
one that was just posted about being a non-traditional 3L. And I'll just say, our fellowship is open to all, it's open to everyone. And, I've only been back at the firm in this capacity for a couple of years, but I have seen candidates who are second career applicants, and that is just fine with us.
Same for us as well. As long as you meet kind of our other eligibility, that's great. I will actually say non-traditional folks who have prior career experience are often really great candidates because you tend to have a more kind of realistic sense of what actual work looks like and how to put together a proposal and goal setting and project management. That's all a key part of our project. So I love to see a candidate with a prior career in an interview. It's great.
All right. Are there any other, gonna pause, very long pause to see if there are any other questions from folks in our audience. Everyone's been so engaged. Thank you so much on this kind of sleepy Tuesday, very windy Tuesday here in DC. I do want to just uplift some of the comments that Christina is putting in the chat. Absolutely reach out to folks. I think the biggest takeaway is it never hurts to ask. It never hurts to ask the folks that are sitting on this panel right now for just advice and insight. And it doesn't hurt to ask the people that you might be interested in working with what it's like to work there, or what opportunities might be available to you. Absolutely, your career office should be your first stop. Absolutely incredible advice coming from folks like Jenny and folks around in career offices around the country, trying to make sure that you are gainfully employed post-graduation and making the steps towards that while you're in law school. It does not look like we have any more questions from our audience. I will say that a lot of the resources that were shared today in the chat and in conversation will be shared in a follow-up email, including contact information for the folks that are here so that you can reach out and ask any questions that you might have. Please reach out to WCL if there's anything that Washington Council of Lawyers can do to support you in your journey. Oh, it looks like we've got one more. Application process we have a question about the application process. We want to take this really quick. The application process is lengthy, and I wanted to know if there is support for the process or somebody that you can talk to about it. Jenny, I think this question's best for you.
I know. So if you are a Georgetown student, like you and I are going to be best friends over the summer. We're going to be in touch all the time. We're going to have shared Google documents. But I think that lots of law schools have really wonderful, extremely dedicated, public sector focused career counselors. And so find them, reach out to them. Like sometimes they're like, well, thank you. I can't believe you exist. And I'm like, this is like my job. Like, it's what I get paid to do. And I happen to also love it. So just find them, find people, if you know anybody who went through this process. I think that one of the, I don't even want to say silver linings, but during this uncertain time where we're seeing funding get limited, I will tell you that our office is seeing so many alumni come out and just like, how can we help? What can we do? And so there's like even more than usual, like openness to help. And so like go for it, like go find it and bring it to you. So yeah, so I think it's going to be your careers offices, your and community and people who you're reaching out to. And if you're like, I don't have friends, I don't have family that like would be able to help me with this, like then maybe you're asking like a mentor, like someone who supervised you in an internship or someone who you really look up to. And like it can feel vulnerable and scary. And it's usually meaningful on both sides of that relationship.
Absolutely. And I think that that is a fantastic point to end on. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Please stay safe out there and keep an eye out on your email for our follow-up information.
And thank you, Chris and Washington Council of Lawyers, for holding this every year. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Right.